What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and in this video we're going to be diving into LON format, which is sort of like the unlimited version of Android format. So it's basically played with Android's card pool, but with the Imperial format limited list. Now, this isn't really a format that most people play, so I'm just showing this off more as like a what if, what would the format look like, and why are certain cards limited that are limited in Android, Maybe exploring these decks where they're unlimited will show why some of these cards got hit. And as I mentioned in my sort of introduction video to LON format, I think that the two decks that will probably benefit most from everything being unlimited are Hayabusa OTK and Burn. So let's start out with Hayabusa because this is the more hype deck of the two in my opinion. So in Android format, Mage Power, which is easily the most powerful equip spell in the game, besides Snatch Steal or Premature Burial of course, is at 1 copy, which means that you can't really boost up Hayabusa attack too much with multiple copies of this consistently. Like, you can draw into Mage Power, and if you draw into the one of Mage Power, then you can use it to OTK, but having 3 of this makes it a lot more easy to draw. In addition, we also have access to Sangans, which can be additional searches for something like Hayabusa. Now, in my original build of this deck, I actually forgot that we had 2 Sangans, so I just had 1, and I played with 2 Hayabusa instead. And then in just switching up the deck, I switched it to a Sangan and 1 Hayabusa. I think that 1 Hayabusa is fine, because it is so searchable off of the Witches and the Sangans, and you can get to those easily with Mystic Tomato. Of course, besides these, the deck looks pretty much like a typical Android deck list. We've got 2 Kaiku, 2 Gemini Elf, 2 Bazoo as our beaters of choice. We've got a Jinzo, and we've got a Morphing Jar to potentially draw into our OTK more often. You could also be playing Cyber Jar here. That does deal with Jinzo as well. But given the equips that we've got, I feel like there are other ways to deal with Jinzo. So the Morphing Jar, I think, should be fine. For the spells, we've got the 3 Mage Power, as I mentioned. Having 3 of this makes it a lot more consistent. We've also got an Act of Despair. Now, United We Stand was also unlimited in Imperial format because it hadn't come out yet. So you could potentially be playing 3 United We Stand here instead. I really don't like United We Stand in this format. I think that there are less ways to really abuse it with the Hayabusa for an OTK push, and so I prefer Act of Despair. Act of Despair also has the additional benefit of, like, if your opponent has a Jinzo, and you've got no cards on field, you can potentially summon out a Mystic Tomato, equip it with Act of Despair, and attack into that Jinzo and clear it that way. You can't really do that with United We Stand, so I do like that Act of Despair has some more niche applications that United We Stand can't quite cover. But you could potentially play this as United We Stand here instead. We've also got a suite of power spells, Change of Heart, Confiscation, Dark Hole, Delinquent Duo, Monster Reborn, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry. And for our spell and trap removal of choice, we've got 2 Heavy Storm and 2 Mystical Space Typhoon. We're playing 2 Heavy Storm to potentially clear our opponent's back row, clear the way for a Hayabusa push at the end of the game. For the traps, we've got a Call of the Haunted Imperial Order, 3 Jar of Greed to potentially draw into our equips in Hayabusa more quickly. We've got a Mirror Force, and we've also got a Skull Lair. Skull Lair can be great at clearing the way for your Hayabusa to attack in. For the side deck, we've got 3 more beaters, Bazoo, Kaiku, and Gemini Elf. We've also got a Mystical Space Typhoon and 2 Dust Tornado for more back row focused decks. We've got 2 Noblemen of Crossout and a Ceasefire for more flip focused decks. We've got 2 Solemn Wishes in case we're up against Burn. And we've got 2 Torrential Tributes and 2 Trap Holes in case we're against a more beat stick focused deck. We also do have a Fusion deck here, even if it will probably never come up. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. Not much here has changed from the Hayabusa list that I showed off in Android format, but I really do think that having the 3 Mage Power makes the OTK a lot more consistent. So let's see if it actually does in some games. Okay, we've got a game against Dump Truck here, who's a frequent guest of the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are playing Hayabusa OTK. Unclear what they're playing, but let's find out. They're going to start by winning the rock, paper, scissors, which is obviously unfortunate, but let's see if we can still manage to pull one out despite that. This is a pretty good hand. We've got Morphing Jar plus a bunch of cards we can set, potentially recover some advantage later on. They're just going to set 2 and pass back to us, and Sangan is honestly a perfect draw here. We're going to summon out that Sangan, get in for 1,000. They're not going to trap hole or do anything like that on the Sangan, and we can save our Heavy Storm for later. So we're going to set this Heavy Storm, figuring that they wouldn't just set 2 back row, that couldn't be chained to Heavy Storm on the first turn. So we figure we'll set the Heavy as a bluff, maybe get them to commit to some more back row that actually does stuff, and then fire the Heavy Storm next turn. they are going to start out by firing a heavy storm of their own. So they were going for the pro heavy set as well. They're going to chain a Jar of Greed to that, so they will be able to draw. And ultimately, I don't feel bad that I didn't fire the heavy on the first turn. If I'd fired the heavy on the first turn, it basically would have worked out the same way, so it doesn't really matter that much. They're going to think about what to do here, and they're going to go for a painful choice, which can be pretty bad for us. They're going to send the 3 hand rips, a Sangan, and a Pot of Greed. I think of these, we give them the Sangan, as Pot of Greed gets them 2 more cards, which is obviously bad. And we do have a lot of very good cards in our hands, so we don't want to get it hand ripped. So we're going to give them the Sangan here. Although we do think about it for a bit, because we could potentially let them get the Forceful, which isn't the worst if they send one back to deck. It's just we do like the Raigeki and Call of the Haunted in hand. So we're going to give them the Sangan. They're going to bring out a Tomato. A hit over the Sangan here. We're going to get a search of another Tomato. We figure that we can go into a Tomato Crash next turn, which wouldn't be that bad. And main 2, they're just going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw a Jinzo, which is pretty nice. We're going to go for the Tomato, trying to get the Tomato Crash off. Unfortunately, they do have a Trap Hole, which is, you know, it cuts that plan off a bit. But we're going to set this Call of the Haunted, because even if they do a Spawn Trap removal, we can chain it, get back to Sangan, get a search off that. And if they don't, then we can potentially have a really good play next turn. They are indeed going to fire the Mystical Space Typhoon, and we are going to bring back that Sangan, get the search off the Sangan, and find a Witch of the Black Forest here. They're going to bring out that Sangan, attack in for 2,400 with their Tomato and Sangan. Set 1, pass back to us. And we draw a Mystical Space Typhoon of our own. Now, we're going to get a bit aggressive here, just firing the Mystical Space Typhoon on this set. And, you know, it was a bluff. But, I mean, that's honestly a card that would be really bad for us later on if we do need to set the Morphing Jar. So I'm glad we got rid of it now. We're just going to bring out this Kaiku, attack into the Sangan. They will get a search here. But the main reason we're doing this is because we've got the Raigeki in hand, so we can always Raigeki whatever follow-up they have. Now, this could be really bad for us if they've got, like, Change of Heart or Snatch Steal. They take our Kaiku, and then they summon out something like Bazoo. That would just be the end of the game, but we just gotta hope that they don't have that. If they do, then GG's, but, damn, Change of Heart. Okay, they're just going for Jinzo. Okay, that's better than what it could have been. It's still bad, of course, but this is a prime Raigeki board right here, and we've got Skull Lair as well to potentially protect ourselves even further. We're going to Raigeki that board, summon out this Witch of the Black Forest, attack in for 1,100, and then main 2, we're going to set the Skull Lair, pass back to them. They're going to set 1, set another, pass back to us, and we draw an Axe of Despair, which is pretty nice. We are going to play around Morphing Jar, or at least act like we are, so they might not suspect that we've got a Morphing Jar of our own set there. And we're going to attack into their set. We could have equipped the Axe of Despair to the Witch, just to make sure it got over like a 2k defender and didn't drop us down to 500. But people aren't really playing many 2k defenders this format, so I felt like this was a risk that was worth taking. And we want to save the Axe of Despair for in case we've got like Hayabusa Night later on, as that could easily go for an OTK here. They're going to fire Jar of Greed, drawing 1 off that, and bringing out a Bazoo. And now this does represent lethal damage if they do have something to deal with our Skull Lair here. But we can activate Skull Lair at the start of the battle phase, so we might as well let them banish 3 here. We're actually going to chain Skull Lair to the activation of Bazoo's effect, I guess, since they are paying cost. And either way, if they've got MST, then they can do something here. But since it doesn't seem like they do, we're able to banish 4, get rid of that Bazoo. And we feel pretty good about that. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. And I feel like we might be able to pull this one out. You know, there's a bit of a chance that we won't, but I feel pretty good about this. And so we could flip up Morphing Jar now, but I think what we want to actually do here is we're going to think about this for quite a bit, but we're going to set the Imperial, tribute over the Witch of the Black Forest, get a search here. Honestly, we're going to search out something that we don't really want to draw, because now we're going to go for a Morphing Jar push. And I feel pretty good about this. If we draw any of our 3 remaining equipped spells left in deck, then this will be lethal damage if they don't have a Mystical Space Typhoon, which, you know, given that they didn't Mystical Space Typhoon the Skull Lair last turn, I feel like is a pretty good chance. We do draw the Mage Power, so we're able to equip that to the Morphing Jar, and we'll also equip the Axe of Despair to the Morphing Jar, and that will actually boost it by 3,000 attack, so this will be well over lethal damage. So we will be able to win the game there, and I do think that one of the main reasons we were able to win that game is because we were able to play 3 Mage Power. It made going for that slightly risky play a bit less risky, And, you know, honestly, if we were playing the old Hayabusa Knight deck that I played in Android, we could have done that same thing. As the main changes I made there were swapping out some Axe of Despairs for Mage powers, and it still would have worked out fine if we had had the Axe of Despair there, as Morphing Jar would have been at 2,700, 27 plus 24 is 51, so we would have still been fine there. But, you know, we were able to show off that you're able to draw Mage power more easily in this version of the deck. Don't worry, though, we will have some Hayabusa action later on, because I know that's what people are here for. And speaking of, we draw Hayabusa right off the top. So that's a pretty good sign. They're going to set one pass back to us. We draw a Kaiku. We're going to just bring out the Sangan, attack in for 8,000 here. Get in. We're going to set an Imperial order, pass back to them. And they're going to bring out a Bazoo the Soul Eater, which is kind of unfortunate. They're able to hit over the Sangan for 600. We'll be able to get a search of a Witch here. And then they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Skull Lair, which is very nice. Not really the best right now since we don't have any monsters in grave. We're going to bring out a Kaiku to potentially clear the Bazoo. Unfortunately, they do have a trap hole for that. We don't set the Skull Lair because we don't have enough cards in grave to actually make it worth it. They're going to banish one off of the Bazoo, so it's at 1,900. And they'll be able to hit in for 19. Not the end of the world. You know, we still got a lot of options here. Snatch Steal is a pretty good one. We're going to set this Mystic Tomato, pass back to them. And, you know, if they attack into the Mystic Tomato, we can get a search, tribute off for Jinzo next turn, and feel pretty good about that. They're going to hit in, and our lack of a second Sangan here really does come back to bite us, as we could have searched out Sangan, gotten a search off of tributing this for Jinzo, and been pretty set. Now, I have a couple options to make here. I could just summon out the Jinzo attack over the Bazoo, and that would be good enough. But I want to get aggressive. We've got Hayabusa Knight in hand. We've got Call of the Haunted Skull Lair. So I figure that we can potentially win the game very, very soon. So I'm going to make an aggressive play here. Summon out the Jinzo. They're going to shotgun the MST now that Jinzo's on the field, which is an interesting choice on their part. If they had saved it, they would have been able to use it on the Snatch Steal here. But as such, we were able to get in for 4,900 points of damage, which I feel like is pretty good. Main 2, we're just going to pass back to them. We could set an additional card here, but with Jinzo on the field, if they do have like a heavy storm, we don't want to lose that as well. Now, of course, it's very unfortunate if they do have like a heavy storm or a mystical space typhoon. They get the Bazoo back, can hit over the Jinzo, and that would be bad for us. But we've got follow-up plays. The Call of a Haunted lets us bring back the Jinzo later. The Skull Lair can pop their Bazoo. So I feel like we can just wrap this up in a couple turns. Unfortunately, they've got heavy. And they've also got Snatch Steal, and that will indeed be the end of the game because they can just buff up Bazoo a little bit more after that. I think that maybe I just got too aggressive there. Maybe I should have played a bit more conservatively, and we could have won that one. But I figured, you know, we're playing an OTK deck. I want to cut down their life points to size, so I went for the greedy play, and it came back to bite me. But we will try and pull out a win in Game 3 and see if it works out any better for us. So we are going to open a really good hand here. Wow. We're going to fire the Delinquent Duo here and rip 2 cards out of their hand, which is very nice. We're going to hit a Skull Lair, and they're going to discard a Bazoo. We're going to bring out a Bazoo of our own, banish the Delinquent Duo, just to protect it against Kaiku or Gemini Elf, and then we're going to set this Jar of Greed, pass back to them. We can always get another card engraved to banish off the Bazoo with the Jar of Greed, so I feel fine doing this play. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. And we draw Hayabusa Knight, which is really good. We might actually have lethal here. If we Jar of Greed, heavy their back row, change of heart, summon Hayabusa Knight, equip it with Mage power. If we draw a spell or trap off of the Jar of Greed, I actually think we might win the game, depending on what their set is. So we're going to go for the Jar of Greed. Unfortunately, we draw Morphing Jar, which won't quite do it for the Mage power here. We're still going to make this play, as it's really, really good. So we bring out the Mystic Tomato. We're going to banish 3 off the Bazoo, summon out this Hayabusa Knight, and equip it with Mage power. So this is going to be a lot of damage here. This will be 3,000 off the Hayabusa Knight, 2,500 off of the Bazoo, and then an additional 1,400 off of the Mystic Tomato. So the reason I go for this is we've got Morphing Jar as follow-up, so we can potentially get an additional hand in case they do manage to clear this board, and this is putting a lot of pressure on them. So we're going to pass back to them. They will get the Mystic Tomato back, but honestly, Mystic Tomato doesn't really help them out much here, because Mystic Tomato does summon an attack, so, you know, they'll be taking damage if we hit over the tomato. They are going to send 5 off of this painful. We don't want to give them the forceful because we want to keep the morphing jar in hand in case they do have ways to clear our board. So we are just going to give them a jar of greed. We figure we might be wrapping up the game next turn anyways, so it should be fine. They're just going to set 3, pass back to us, and Bazoo will lose its boost here, but I still feel pretty good. We're going to set this Mystical Space Typhoon, and then set the Morphing Jar just in case they've got a Morphing Jar of their own. And then we're going to hit in to this Mystic Tomato with the Bazoo. Now, the Hayabusa Knight's at 2,000 attack, so if they do bring out a monster, we can get them pretty low potentially, and it looks like they will indeed bring out a Mystic Tomato. We're going to hit over the Mystic Tomato. They'll take 600 from that. And now if they bring out another Mystic Tomato, or honestly any monster off the tomato, they just lose the game. So they're not going to search with the tomato, and we'll be able to hit in to the remaining set. Unfortunately, it's a Nimble Mamanga, so they will be able to recover a lot of the life points that we dealt to them, which is obviously unfortunate. This does sort of halt our aggressive pressure a little bit. They've got a Jar of Greed to draw into more stuff for them, hopefully. And they're going to fire a Heavy Storm, which will clear the Mage Power and the Mystical Space Typhoon. They're going to flip up this Nimble Mamanga, crash into our Hayabusa Knight, so they'll be able to gain another 1,000 in case we get something like Raigeki, I guess. And they're going to set an additional 1, pass back to us. We draw Acts of Despair, and you know, we could potentially win the game if we get lucky off this Morphing Jar, so we are just going to flip up the Morphing Jar. We draw 5 here, and we do draw Raigeki, so we are just going to go for it. If they've got Imperial Order, that's unfortunate, but I still feel like we're in a good position. And unfortunately, it looks like they did not. That was just a Mystical Space Typhoon. So this will be the end of the game, as we can just buff up the Bazoo to 2,500, and we know that they don't have a Mirror Force on field because it's in Graveyard. So I think that this game does a really good job of showing how powerful the Hayabusa Knight deck can be now that there are 3 Mage Power in the format. Mage Power is a lot more consistent to draw into, and it's an incredibly powerful equip, even if you don't draw the Hayabusa. We've got some more games to show you with this deck, though, as I do know that it is pretty popular. So let's see if we can pull off the combo in those games as well. Okay, we've got another game against Dump Truck here. They're on a different deck, though, because after we played that first game, they were like, can I try this out against a different deck? And I said, sure. So let's see what they're on. We are going to go into the rock, paper, scissors, and we have a pretty intense rock, paper, scissors match here, but unfortunately they do manage to outplay us, so they will be going first here, which is a bit unfortunate. Looks like they're playing a 41 card deck, which means it's probably an interesting sort of brew. But they're just going to bring out a Sangan, set 1, pass back to us. We feel pretty good about this. We're just going to bring out a Kaiku, hit over the Sangan. They'll get a search here, which of course isn't ideal. But we've got Imperial Order in case they've got a way to clear the Kaiku. If they've got like a Gemini Elf, then that's obviously bad for us, but nothing we could really do about that. The Bazoo would also lose to that. They're just going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon in the end phase, and unfortunately they do snipe the Jar of Greed, but at least we do have the Imperial Order still online. They're going to fire Snatch Steal. We're just going to flip up this Imperial Order, just in case they've got a Jinzo. The Snatch Steal will actually stay equipped to the Kaiku while Imperial Order is on the field, but it shouldn't matter too much, as I think we do just want to keep paying for it. Yep, we're just going to pay 700 to keep paying for it. Summon out this Bazoo. No need to buff it up yet, as we're just going to use it to clear their set. And unfortunately, they do have a Mirror Force, so that will clear our board here. Luckily, we've got the Morphing Jar to recover and a Hayabusa Knight to get a bit aggressive here. So it's not the worst thing in the world. They're going to flip up this Mask of Darkness, and they're going to be able to get back a trap. They're going to choose the Mirror Force, which is very unfortunate, as that will be pretty bad for a deck that wants to get a bit aggressive. So they're going to hit in for 1900. Main 2, they're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw Jar of Greed, which is nice. We don't really have anything we want to Change of Heart here yet, so we're just going to set the Morphing Jar, set the Jar of Greed, set the Change of Heart, pass back to them. Hopefully we'll be able to draw 5 good ones here. They're going to tribute over the Mask of Darkness for a Jinzo, which is unfortunate. And then they're going to think about this for a little bit. They're going to set 1 and attack into the Morphing Jar, so it seems like they did have the read that we were on the Morphing Jar here. And this is a pretty decent hand of 5 new cards. They're going to hit in for 1,000 here, but I feel okay about this. Until they fire Delinquent Duo, that is going to be pretty rough for us. They're going to hit the Kaiku, and we've got to choose about exactly what we want to discard here. I'm going to discard the Sangan because I value the Forceful Sentry a little bit more. Also, we do know that they set a card knowing that we have Morphing Jar, so we could potentially Mystical Space Typhoon that away once we let our Imperial Order die. Or actually, because Imperial Order's up, we can just fire it anyways. because Jinzo's on field. They're going to set 2, pass back to us, and Mystic Tomato plus Active Despair is very nice. Now, I figured that they set their 2 newest back row because there's something like Mystical Space Typhoon among them, because that's really one of the only things that can be used when Jinzo's on field. So I feel like what I want to do here is I want to snipe one of their new back row and then go for a Mystic Tomato with Active Despair into Jinzo play here, because that crashes with the Jinzo, and then I could potentially get out a Witch, attack into the Sangan. We know about the Mirror Force, but, you know, if they want to fire it on Witch, we're perfectly fine with that. So I am just going to blind fire the Mystical Space Typhoon. And luckily, we do hit a Mystical Space Typhoon, so we were correct in that read. They're going to hit our Jar of Greed here, which is a little bit unfortunate, but not the worst. We're going to summon out this Mystic Tomato, equip it with Active Despair, and then try attacking into the Jinzo here. Unfortunately, they do indeed have another Mystical Space Typhoon as well, so that we'll be able to put a stop to our plans here. We're going to take 1,000 and search out a monster from deck. We're just going to grab another Mystic Tomato, but it's not looking good for us. We're going to hit over this Sangan at least. They'll get a search off this, but we've got Forceful Sentry to deal with whatever they search out. So main 2, we're going to fire the Forceful, see what they've got, and I think of these, we want to get rid of the Tomato, because Tomato can crash into our Tomatoes. We're lower on Tomatoes than they are, oh, wait, no, we're not. So I guess we could have done that. I guess we could have left them with the Tomato. So maybe this is a bit of a misplay on my part, but we are just going to send back the Tomato. And, I mean, I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, quick spoiler alert, it won't actually matter for the outcome of the game. They're just going to bring out a Cannon Soldier, and then they're going to fire this Raigeki, and that will just be the end of the game. So game 1 didn't really go as well for us. We did have Hayabusa, but unfortunately we didn't really have anything to pair with it, and they had Mirror Force anyways. So, nothing we could really do there. But it was cool showing for our opponent's deck, which seems to be some sort of like flip control sort of strategy. I'm guessing that they're playing some like Magic Cylinders, given that Magic Cylinder is unlimited in the format. So that's something good to keep in mind, as Magic Cylinder can be pretty brutal against the Hayabusa OTK deck. We're just going to start by setting off this Mystic Tomato with a Jar of Greed here, passing back to them. They're going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest, and they'll hit into our set. It ties exactly with Mystic Tomato's defense, so, you know, that's fine by us. They're going to fire a Delinquent Duo here, and they're going to hit the Snatch Deal out of our hand, which is quite unfortunate. We're going to think about when we are just going to get rid of this Bazoo. Maybe if we had another Sangan in deck, we could have potentially brought it out off of the Tomato and been fine pitching it here to Duo. But I think ultimately this is fine. We're going to Jar of Greed in their end phase after we see that they set 2. And they're going to pass back to us. We're going to fire a Heavy Storm here to clear away their back row. They've got Ceasefire, so that we'll be able to chain to this, costing us 1,000. But I still feel pretty good about this. We're able to attack in with the Mystic Tomato, clearing the Witch, and then attacking in for 1,000 with the Sangan. They're going to search out a Giant Germ, which is a bit unfortunate here. And we'll just pass back to them. We don't really have any good monsters in Graveyard to chain Call the Haunted to, so we don't want to set in case they've got Spell and Trap removal. We'll wait for the Sangan to wind up in the grave instead. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. It's very likely that that's a Giant Germ. And we could potentially go a bit aggressive here, setting 2 and then activating Mage Power to buff up one of our monsters to hit over one of their attack position Germs. But I think that's a little bit greedy. So what we're actually going to do here is we're just going to hit into their set with the Sangan. We will take 500 off the Germ, and they'll be able to get out 2 more Germs, but we'll be able to hit over one of those with a Tomato here. So that'll cost them 400. We'll lose 500 though. We'll set this Jar of Greed, pass back to them. And they're going to fire a Pot of Greed, which is pretty good. They're going to be able to draw 2 here, and then they'll just crash their Germ into our Sangan. We'll get a search here. We're going to grab a Hayabusa Knight, as we are pretty close to assembling an OTK here. And they're going... Well, we take 500 from the Germ, and then they're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw Imperial Order, which is pretty good. We're going to fire this Jar of Greed, and Mystical Space Typhoon is pretty great. I think we could potentially just go for lethal here, because we fire Mystical Space Typhoon on their back row. We can buff up Hayabusa Knight to 2,500 with the Mage Power, and then if we attack into their set with Mystic Tomato, that's not quite lethal, but it's still very good. So we're going to go for it. Unfortunately, they've got an Imperial Order of their own, so that will cut off our play here a little bit. And we're just going to attack into their set. It's a Magician of Faith, so they'll be able to get back a spell here, which is a bit unfortunate. Main 2, we're just going to set the Call of the Haunted and the Imperial Order and pass back to them. And I feel okay about maybe setting up the OTK next turn. They're going to let the Imperial Order die in standby phase, so that way they can activate their powerful spells. And they're going to fire off a Monster Reborn. We're just going to try and nip this in the bud by firing off an Imperial Order, and that does go through. So they'll set one, pass back to us, and I mean, this is a pretty great hand for an OTK here. With these double mage powers, we can buff up the Hayabusa Knight to 4,000 attack. And, I mean, that should be enough to kill them no matter what their set monster is, unless it's Cyberjar. But if it's Cyberjar, we're replenishing our resources anyways, so I feel fine about attacking into that. So we are indeed just going to let the Imperial Order lapse, fire 2 mage power on the Hayabusa Knight, and just try and go for game here. And that will indeed be the end of the game. So, you know, we were able to pull off the combo there in a big way, and I think that does show how effective the mage powers can be at boosting up Hayabusa. Of course, if one of those mage powers was replaced with an Act of Despair, then we could have probably still won there, and even if both of them were Acts of Despair, we probably could have won in that situation, but it would have made it a lot less of a sure thing for us. So I feel like, you know, having the additional mage powers really did come up there. And it was just really cool to see a huge Hayabusa Knight attacking in for so much damage. So we are going to go second here, as, you know, we did win game 2, so they're going to choose to go first. They're going to set 3, pass back to us. We have Pot of Greed, so we're going to fire that, draw 2. And we've drawn both of our Hayabusa Knights, which is a bit unfortunate, and part of the reason why I swapped out one for a Sangan, as it can brick a little bit. We're going to bring out this Gemini Elf, attack into their set here. It's a Sangan, they'll get a search. And then in main 2, we're just going to set 1, pass back to them. And the reason we went for this set 1 play here is if they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own, they try to snipe one of our back row, then we can fire Mystical Space Typhoon hitting their other back row. And if that's also a Mystical Space Typhoon, then they won't really be able to get an advantage off of it. We could have also just gone for the double Mystical Space Typhoon play turn 1 to dodge around Trap Hole, but I figured it wouldn't be the worst just to save it for later. They're going to go for a Reborn here, targeting the Sangan, which means maybe we should have actually gone for the double Mystical Space Typhoon play just to snipe that out of their back row. But as is, we're just going to blind snipe their new set to prevent them from using it, as we do have another Mystical Space Typhoon in hand. And this turn, we have the option to go really big here. I do actually slightly misplay this. I should start off by firing the Nobleman of Crossout instead of just firing oh wait, I do that. Never mind. I was thinking of a different turn, I guess. Yeah, we start with the Nobleman of Crossout because if they've got Imperial Order, we can chain Mystical Space Typhoon to it. Now we're going to go for the Mystical Space Typhoon. It's just a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own. And we're going to attack into the Sangan. They'll get a search here. But, you know, into Raigeki, the manga isn't the best. We attack in with the Kaiku, and we're able to banish 2 from their grave. We could have changed the order of this, but I do value getting rid of the Sangan and the Reborn over just getting in 100 extra points of damage, given that we do know that they're on Magicians of Faith. So we're going to pass back to them, and they're going to fire Snatch Steal on the Gemini Elf, so they'll be able to get in for some damage here. We'll take 100 from that, and then 1,000 from the manga. But luckily we can still clear this with the Raigeki, which isn't the worst. Heavy Storm, though, provides us with a bit of a better option here. We're going to fire the Heavy Storm. They're going to chain Jar of Greed. We'll get back the Gemini Elf here. And we got to think a bit about this. We are just going to Raigeki that Momonga to prevent them from deck thinning and getting back life points. Because as is, this is over half their life points. And we could potentially be setting up for a majorly big turn next turn. This is going a bit aggressive. So it could come back to bite us in a big way, but I feel ultimately fine about this. They're going to bring out the Giant Germ, crash into Hayabusa Knight here, and get out 2 more Giant Germs. We'll take 500 from that, and they're going to set 1, pass back to us. If we draw an Equip Spell here, this could be really good. Unfortunately, we do not. They're going to shotgun the Skull Lair now on standby, which makes a lot of sense here, because if they didn't do this, we could have just reborn the Kaiku and prevented them from getting off the Skull Lair at all. So we are going to think about this for a bit, and we're just going to fire this Monster Reborn targeting Kaiku. They're going to chain their Skull Lair to that, so they will be able to pop our Gemini Elf before Kaiku hits the field. But luckily, Kaiku will be able to stop them from going for more Skull Lair plays. We're just going to attack in to the Giant Germ here. So we'll be able to banish 2, and they'll take 800 from that. We take 500 from that as well, but we feel pretty good about this. We're going to keep the Hayabusa Knight in hand, as we don't want to crash into their Germ. And we might as well save it for later to get more aggressive, given that they're at very low life. They're going to switch the Germ to defense, set 1, pass back to us. We draw Mage Power, which is very nice here. And we are just going to think about this for a bit because we could potentially go for lethal damage, depending on what their set is. If their set isn't something that brings more monsters out onto the board, then summoning out Hayabusa Knight and equipping it with Mage Power will indeed potentially be lethal. So we are going to summon out the Hayabusa Knight, equip it with the Mage Power here, and go into battle. We're going to attack their set first just to see what it is. If it's Tomato, then we can attack into whatever they bring out with Kaiku. But unfortunately for us, it is a Nimble Manga. At least they've only got one copy left in deck, so we will be able to clear their entire field here. But they will gain some more life points, which is a bit unfortunate. We're going to pass back to them, and they are going to summon out a Bazoo, attack in to the Hayabusa Knight just to clear that, which makes a lot of sense. And they're going to set one pass back to us. We draw a Sangan, which is pretty good. We're just going to attack in to the Bazoo. No need to play into like Torrential. And that will just go through, so maybe we should have actually summoned out the Sangan and gotten in a little bit more damage here. As is, we're just going to set the Sangan, pass back to us. I feel like we're in a pretty good spot here. They're going to bring out a Kaiku, crash into our Kaiku, and then they're going to pass back to us. We draw a Jar of Greed, which is pretty nice. We're going to flip up the Sangan here, and we're going to attack in directly for 1,000. They could Skull Lair that, but I understand why they don't, because if they Skull Lair Sangan, we just get another search later. So they're saving Skull Lair for a more high-impact target. They're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon on our back row. It's just Jar of Greed, so we'll chain it, draw into Imperial Order, which is very nice. They're going to set one pass back to us. We draw a Gemini Elf, which is pretty good. This will likely die to a Skull Lair here, but we're going to go for it anyways. We're going to attack into their set with Gemini Elf, and indeed they will Skull Lair that. So we will lose our Elf, but now they've got very little cards in Graveyard. We attack into a Magician of Faith, which means they'll be able to get back the Mystical Space Typhoon here, but luckily into an Imperial Order that isn't the best. They're going to just set one pass back to us, and we draw Jar of Greed, which is pretty good. We'll attack in with Sangan for another 1,000. Main 2 set the Jar of Greed. They're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon on our new back row, which I think makes sense. Unfortunately, we will just Imperial Order that, as this does shut down the spells that they would potentially activate on their turn as well. And I feel pretty good about our position. They are going to set one pass back to us. We're just going to fire Jar of Greed here just to see what we get. We draw a Mystic Tomato, which is very nice. And I think we will just go for that. We're summoning out the Mystic Tomato. And that will indeed be the end of the game. And it looks like their sets, yeah, just an Imperial Order and another Mystical Space Typhoon. And, oh, they had a Raigeki in hand. Okay, so the Imperial Order really did come in clutch here. So I'm glad that that game got to show off a bit more of how Hayabusa can really put on aggressive pressure, especially with Mage Power. Now, Game 2, we were able to buff up Hayabusa to huge degrees there. Game 3, we weren't really able to. We were just able to get it up by 500, but that 500 was enough to make it an intimidating threat. So I do think that the deck is looking pretty good in LON format so far. Let's dive in to the last game I have to show for you for this deck and see how it performs in that. Okay, we've got a third and final game against Dump Truck. They're playing yet another new deck, I believe, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, I did make a change to my deck before playing this. I switched it to like having 2 Sangan, which I showed off in the sort of deck breakdown initially, because, you know, bricking on the 2 Hayabusa Knights in the previous game obviously wasn't the best. So it's nice to have the 2 Sangan in here over that. And it looks like even with just 1 Hayabusa Knight, we can just hard draw it, which is pretty good. We're going to fire Delinquent Duo here, discard a Sangan and a Bazoo, set the Mystic Tomato here, and pass back to them. They're going to summon out a Gemini Elf, hit into our Tomato. We'll be able to get out a Witch of the Black Forest, which is pretty good. And they're going to set one pass back to us, and I feel pretty good about this. Like, we're in a really good spot. We've got some very powerful cards in hand, but we can just bide our time here. If they attack into the Witch, we get a search of something like a Bazoo, which can clear the Gemini Elf. And we've got Raigeki in case they bring out more monsters as well. They're just going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon on our back row here. And then they're going to summon out another Gemini Elf. They'll hit in to our Witch here. We are going to search out a Jinzo because we do have the Change of Heart. This is a little bit risky in case they've got Imperial Order. We'd be in a really tough spot. But I think it's worth the risk. Main 2, they're going to set one pass back to us. And we draw Mirror Force. So this is just getting better and better here, honestly. We're going to think about what to do. We're going to bring out this Hayabusa Knight, then fire the Raigeki here. Because even if they've got Imperial Order, we can just set this Mirror Force here to protect our Hayabusa. And then we're going to get in for a cool 2,000. Main phase 2, we're just going to set a Mirror Force, pass back to them. And they're going to bring out a Cannon Soldier. So they'll try hitting over our Hayabusa. You know, we could just let this go through. But I figure that we've got the aggressive pressure going, so why put an end to it now? And we might as well just keep the good stuff coming. We're going to attack in with Hayabusa yet again for another 2,000, saving our power cards for later because we don't really think that they have an easy way to kill us here. And they are going to just pass back to us. So I feel very good about this. I think we can just win the game right here. If we tribute over Hayabusa for Jinzo and then reborn the Hayabusa, that should be well over lethal. And that will indeed get in for lethal damage. So, you know, that was a really sick game one. And we didn't get to show off the Mage powers, but Hayabusa put in a lot of work on its own. So really cool to see. We're going to go into game 2. I think we keep the deck largely the same. We might side out the hand rips given that we're going second. And it looks like we do indeed because we've got this Nobleman of Cross out here. We didn't really get to have a good glimpse of what their deck was, but the Nobleman's going to come in clutch against whatever that set is there. We're going to fire a Heavy Storm first. They've got Imperial orders, so we're just going to chain this Mystical Space Typhoon to that. They've got Jar of Greed, so maybe we should have done this in a different order. Maybe we should have activated the Nobleman of Cross out first, and then if they Imperial ordered that, then we could Mystical Space Typhoon that, and maybe not worry as much about their lone back row to just get more value off of Heavy later in the game. But I think ultimately it worked out. We're going to fire Nobleman on their set, summon out this Kaiku, attack in for 1,800. And banish 2 from their graveyard. We're just going to set this Act of Despair here, pass back to them, and they're going to summon out a Kaiku of their own. They're going to Fisher away our Kaiku, which is a bit unfortunate, but we do have a way to clear the Kaiku next turn, potentially. They're going to banish 2, main 2, they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Mystic Tomato, so we could summon out Mystic Tomato and pair it with Act of Despair, but I feel like Mystic Tomato can get more defensive value later for us, so I feel fine doing this. We're going to clear that Kaiku, and then we're actually going to banish 1 from our grave on the Bazoo, and the reason we do this in case they've got like a Mystical Space Typhoon or a Heavy Storm, to clear Acts of Despair, we want to protect our Bazoo a little bit after that. They're going to bring out a Sangan, and they've got a Fisher that will also clear the Bazoo. They'll attack in for 1,000 here, and then pass back to us. We've got Mystic Tomato, and we've also got Imperial orders, so I'm feeling very good about that. We'll hit in over the Sangan for 400. They'll get a search here, grabbing a Mystic Tomato of their own, which is obviously very unfortunate. We'll set this Imperial order pass back to them. They're going to fire Dark Hole. We're just going to chain Imperial order to keep our Mystic Tomato on field. And they're going to go for Tomato Crashes, which I think makes a lot of sense. We're both going to crash. We're going to bring out a Tomato. They're going to bring out a Tomato. They're going to attack in. We're going to bring out another Tomato. I mean, you've seen this before if you've seen these Android or any other DM era format from this time period replays that I've shown off. But we're going to go through all of our Tomatoes in deck and finally end on a Witch of the Black Forest. They are going to bring out a Witch of their own. And I feel very good about this. They're going to hit into our Witch. And we actually have to make an important decision here about what beater we want to add to hand, given that they can search after us. So they can get whatever beater answers the beater that we search out from their deck to hand after we do. So we're going to go for a Bazoo for that reason, because if they do have a Kaiku, then they can't immediately hit over the Bazoo. They've got to wait a turn. So I feel like this is the best choice here. They're going to grab another Bazoo of their own as well, which means that they might actually have a Kaiku of their own, which would be very unfortunate. We're going to pay 700 for the Imperial Order as we didn't draw a spell, but Sculler will be able to deal with their Bazoo, so I feel very good about this. We can potentially just go for game here, because this will buff the Bazoo up to 2,500, and then next turn we could potentially be able to win. We'll set this Skull Lair, pass back to them. Although actually we might not be able to win because we won't have any more monsters in grave to banish. They're going to bring out a Bazoo of their own, and then they're going to banish 3 from their graveyard here. And buff that up to 2,500 to try and crash. At the start step of the battle phase, though, we are going to fire the Skull Lair, and then we're going to banish 4 from our graveyard. And this wasn't quite the end of the game. As I said, you know, it would depend on what the top card of our deck was. I think I do mill the top card later just to see what it is. I do indeed, and Nobleman actually would have made it so that they wouldn't have actually been able to lose the next turn. I would have been able to drop them down to 900, which obviously isn't the best place, especially when they've got spells in hand for the Imperial Order. But the game might not have been over. However, we were in a very winning position from this point, so I don't blame them for conceding at that point. So I hope that these games manage to show off how cool Hayabusa Ignite can be in the LON format games. You know, having 3 Mage power makes drawing it a lot more consistent, and I really do think that it came up in a lot of these games here. However, I do think that if you sort of swapped in Axe of Despairs for these Mage powers, they would be similarly powerful. And I think this shows that the Hayabusa Ignite deck does have legs in Android format as well, even if it is considered to be tier 2. Maybe this deck will also be considered tier 2 in LON format as further testing goes on, or maybe Hayabusa Ignite OTK deserves to be tier 1 in Android format. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, but until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.